Hi everybody. I wanted to just create a little video kind of walking you through some of the writing instruction for this week, specific to creating your claim, which is essentially your thesis. In an argument, your thesis is called your claim. But because when you argue or when you're creating an argument, you're not just responding kind of in a general sense. Like in our case, we're talking about free speech, but the way in which you form your argument about free speech comes down to the type of claim that you're trying to make. If you decide to go into grad school and you take a course on formal argumentation or rhetoric, you will be doing a deep dive into types of claims. But for our purposes, we are just going to be experimenting with 4 basic types of claims and kind of allowing you to choose which type of claim you want to use for your essay, okay? Because again, we're not just going to go in and kind of say, I'm going to write about free speech and social media without really having a narrow focus for how you are going to form that argument, okay? All right, I know that doesn't make sense yet, but let's walk through some of these examples. So this textbook page kind of breaks down this idea of a question at issue. You may have known this in previous courses as kind of like your essential question, your driving question, your research question sometimes. But for the argument, it's called a question at issue. And basically what you're trying to do is ask specific questions that your claim will attempt to answer. But the question kind of drives how you approach your essay. So the best examples are actually on the next page. Let me scroll into the next page here. Oops. The questions at issue page kind of gives you an overview of what that even means. The claims page is kind of where those pieces of the puzzle get put together. So these are the 4 types of claims that we are going to be working with. The claim of fact, claim of definition, claim of value, or the claim of rule, which is or policy. Chances are you have been writing questions of policy. Like most of your arguments that you've written probably in previous English classes have been policy. Should we do this? Should we do this? Should we do this, right? But now that you're in 221, welcome, you get to kind of broaden your approach to your essay. And again, kind of think about, well, maybe I want to be talking about something different. The claim of fact. This is about whether or not something is true. Your claim of fact. So you can kind of look at here, right? That the claim of fact is something that can be proven with data, with statistics. It's an argument that is much more heavily based in logos. Take a look at my example here. So this was the example that I put in the discussion board for this week. And here's my question of fact. Again, this was an example about sanctuary cities and funding. My question of fact would be, are sanctuary cities causing local police departments to direct local taxpayer funds to non-residents? So this means then that my argument would be discussing this issue of fact, right? Maybe, depending on what I found, maybe local police departments are providing taxpayer funds. Maybe they are not. Maybe it's a split, right? My whole essay would explore this question of fact. My claim would indicate that I am writing an essay or an argument, about this question of fact. It would be clear that I'm going to be using data to support my answer. And my argument would all be about whether or not the funding is coming from, in this case, coming from local police departments. That's the question of fact. So when you're thinking about our topic, free speech, right? How free is free speech? And you need to approach that in terms of cancel culture, or social media or hate speech. So how can you create your question of fact around your essay number 2 topic? What question of fact? Now, you are going to draft for this discussion board all 4 different questions and all 4 types of claims that match up with those questions, but you're only going to choose one for your essay, of course. But I want you to go through the practice of writing these questions because I think it will help you see all the different angles that you could use to approach this essay. So there's the first one, right? The question of fact. The second one is the question of definition. So if I were to, like, again, here's my example, right? Is a sanctuary city free for those in need? Okay, so my argument then is going to be about this word free. Maybe I would write, if this was my essay topic, maybe I would write kind of an argument based on what we mean when we say sanctuary city. What does that mean? My argument might be about that. Now, it might be very well that you choose to write your argument for essay number 2 about what the word free means when we talk about free speech. If you choose to do that, that's a question of definition. That's not a question of fact, right? Because you're not proving a fact there. You're not going to be doing that. You're talking about how we have come to define free, or how we have come to define hate, if you're talking about hate speech, right? And so those are just a few of the ways that you can think about how to write a question of definition for this particular essay. All right. And again, the textbook page here, I think, explains it all really well. Value. How many of you have ever made a Yelp review or an Airbnb review, or better yet, gone to Rate My Professor and rated one of your professors? You were writing an argument of value, right? I love this line. Claims of value might sound like the kind of claims that you get into arguments over Thanksgiving dinner, right? This is kind of where a lot of our arguments tend to land. Take a look at my example here. My value. Is it the responsibility of the United States to provide refuge via sanctuary cities for people seeking aid, whether citizen or non-citizen? That's a question of value. Now, can you see how that's not working to define something? I'm not talking about defining a concept. I'm also not talking about a fact. I'm talking about a value here. What do we value in the United States? Now, this essay then would be focused on whether or not we should provide refuge. Like, is it in our responsibility as a country to do that, right? You can see how I might phrase that as part of my claim. Okay, it's a question of value. So again, now thinking to essay number 2 and thinking about those subtopics and free speech, how might you construct a question of value about that topic? About free speech and social media, for example, or whatever your subtopic is, right? Your question of value is going to basically yield an argument that focuses on, it's almost kind of like a should question, but it's almost a moral question too, right? If you're going to be talking about social media and free speech, your question of value might address the responsibility that social media has to protect its consumers. That would be a question of value, right? Your last question is the question of claim of rule. It's also sometimes called the claim of policy. And again, these are almost always the types of essays that you have probably written before. The should. Should we do this? Should we do this? Should we have free speech? Should we restrict free speech? And so that's the claim of policy or claim of rule. So in my example here, should the United States open up their cities, right? Now that's not a question of value of whether or not that's a right or a wrong. That's a Is this something that we should do? Is this some rule or policy that we should implement? Okay. So the question of rule, again, this is going to be kind of that, the type of essay that many of you are accustomed to writing. And so if you feel like you don't want to explore a fact or a definition or a value, and you just want to kind of put that cozy winter sweater on of, oh, I just want to write a should, you can do that, right? That's your question of rule. So what you're going to be doing for this discussion board is I want you to draft all 4 questions, even though you're only using one for your essay. I want you to draft a question of fact with free speech and your topic. Draft a question of definition. Draft a question of value. Draft a question of rule. And then I want you to draft what you think your claim might be. It's okay if the claim is not finished, right? You can see here, like in order to finish this claim, I actually need to do some research. So even if you have kind of a, here's where I think my claim might go, that's good enough for the discussion board, okay? So again, questions and claims. You're going to do all 4, right? Question, claim, question, claim, question, claim. And then you're going to write just a quick reflection. All right, so you've written all 4 of them now. You have approached your essay number 2 topic in 4 different ways. What do you think you're going to do for your draft? Which approach do you think you're going to take? Because again, the type of question that you are designing is going to shape how you write your argument. If I were to ask a should question here, right, that argument is going to look a lot different than if I was asking for a definition. The type of argument is going to shift based on the question that you create, based on the type of question and the type of claim. So what I'm asking for in the discussion board, again, draft questions and claims for all 4 types, and then just write a little reflection blurb talking about, all right, well, now that I've done all that, which approach am I going to use for my essay? What do I think is going to be the most interesting for me to write about? What's going to be, I think, maybe the strongest essay, right? That's something that I want you to decide. But obviously you have to decide it this week because your rough draft is due by the end. So all 4 questions and claims, reflection, that's what I'm looking for this week. And if it looks like you're kind of a little bit struggling on your discussion boards, then I'll hop on and kind of give you some feedback there. But question of issue, claim, these are going to drive your argument, which is probably not something you have done before as far as arguments go. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask.